All right, question number 3. So at SPR, we not only have grad student authors, we also have grad student reviewers and grad student editors. So one of the questions we often hear is, how long should I spend reviewing this article that's been assigned to me as a peer reviewer? What's y'all's process for that? John, do you want to start?
I'm not sure that this is the answer that folks want to hear, but I just sent an article I reviewed in yesterday, and that one took me at least 4 hours, I'd say. The reason it took me 4 hours is because it was excellent and I wanted this to come out, and I spent a lot of time with it. It's also this particular one is one of those articles where they quote the original Greek in Greek. So you have to think about it a lot. So if it's a bad article, you can see that on the first page, and oftentimes it'll start out bad and just go downhill from there. So you can make an initial assessment very quickly. I would say that one would take maybe an hour if I want to give them detailed feedback. It would be something obvious, like this article clearly has no thesis, or it starts out with one thesis and goes through another and ends up with a third, or the article is not an MLA, or whatever the format of the journal is. So if it's obvious that this is a bad article, I'm not going to spend a long time reading it. And oftentimes they're not going to give you a very detailed report as an author. If it's bad, they will say, I'm sorry, this is not very good, and this is why we rejected it, if that. But if it's a good one that I want to see come out, it'll probably be something like accept with revisions or accept with light revisions. And then I go through line by line, this is good, you need to change these other things, put it in a different order, and that takes time.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And John, this goes along with what you were saying, but quality obviously matters as far as time frame you'll spend on an article. If it's bad, like you said, it's going to be a lot less, or if the quality is not very high. With that said, journals shouldn't be sending you articles that are, that you open up and you're like, this is nonsensical. That you shouldn't be getting those. So bearing that in mind, it still will have an effect on the quality will have an effect on how much time you spend. For me, I think one thing that's really important that helps me just kind of streamline the time I spend on an article as far as peer review goes is having a really streamlined guide from the journal itself. And SPR, Stacey, could probably speak to this, has more than I could, has this for their reviewers. But I want the journal to make it clear to me in some type of a model or format what they want back, right? Whether that's a survey that they're using or just a really clear sheet or an example. I want to know what information they want from me so I can be mindful of that as I'm reading and before I'm engaging with that article for review. And if they don't give it to you, ask for it, 100% ask for it. So that's something that I find really important. And also, I think you have to kind of find a process that works for you as far as peer review goes. For me, I even though this is not great for paper usage, I like to print them out. I like to circle, highlight, make my own notes before I then work on a digital copy and really add those back in. And then I might expand a little bit more or look up some, I don't know, some citations I want them to add or whatever those other like extra recommendations might be. But I really like to go at it the first time with a print copy in hand. That just is my process that I find works best and that I engage best with the piece. It helps me really like hone in as opposed to everything else going on the computer screen. And yeah, the timing for me, 4 hours, I don't know if I've maybe once or twice spent that long, but I would say average, if people are looking for average, my personal average is maybe an hour and a half or 2, probably. I'd probably go at it, read it twice. And it depends on the length too. There's so many factors, but yeah, I think there's a lot. Like I said, you can do it and think up ahead of time, having that clear format and guide, finding a process that works for you. And, it's kind of like practice doesn't make perfect. There's probably no perfect review, but practice improves your review skills for sure.
Yeah, I like that there's some differences between y'all's approach. I I would say in contrast to John, I often will spend a lot more time with a bad paper, maybe even a paper that I'm recommending get rejected. Well, and I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. And I don't think that either of these approaches are better. But I definitely take like a professorial approach to my reviews. I assume that the person I'm giving feedback to is in a similar situation as one of my students and is going to be able to apply the feedback I'm giving. But there's a couple things I do to set myself up to actually be in that position. And one is I only accept reviews on things I really do feel I have advanced knowledge on. So you will often get pitched reviews. Like I'm in language education, and so I will get pitched reviews like, you know, pre-K French immersion for special needs students, empirical study. And I'm like, well, I don't do quantitative research. So that's a no for me. I don't have any experience with those, you know, early years. So that's a no for me. And so even though it's in language education and people want to pitch it to me, I'm like, this is not the right paper for me. I don't have enough expertise to clearly read this. On the other hand, when things are sort of in my wheelhouse, I can read them a lot quicker. I can come up with citations that are missing on the top of my head. I'm embedded in the literature myself, so I know what arguments are happening in the literature and I can point them towards those points of controversy really easily. So I sort of set myself up for success already, just based on which reviews I accept. And I always start with just a pleasure read of the paper. And unlike Megan, I prefer to read digitally. So I open up a Word doc if possible and add all my little notes. And I'm really just like talking back to the paper as I'm reading it. This doesn't make sense. I hope they circle back around to this later, but where's the participant list? You know, and I'm just asking questions as I go, making comments as I go, as if I'm in conversation with the paper. And then I put it down for a few days and let my brain sort out what I've just read. And then I come back to it and decide which of all these comments were real issues that need to be addressed, which are things that actually were just me talking into the void. And I sort of organize my notes, maybe add a few citations, a few recommendations. The other day, I actually did a review where I recommended the paper for rejection, but I spent a solid 4 hours on that paper because I felt like the findings of the research were really important. Just the paper didn't support those findings in a way that made it very legible to readers. So I want the findings to get published, just not in that format. And I gave a ton of feedback of how that might happen. And I don't know what decision the journal is going to make because that's out of my hands. And I don't know if the author will find my feedback constructive, but I really hope they do. And I hope that my work has helped those findings make their way into the world in a way that readers will appreciate. That's my goal as a reviewer anyway. But I would agree that 1.5 hours is probably the minimum it takes me. And I would hate to spend more than 4 hours on a review. That does not feel like a good use of my time.
Can I send my papers to you, Stacey? You sound like a nice, really thorough reviewer. Yeah, and I think, would you say that?
Yes, actually, Megan, you can. Please send me all your papers.
Well, you're sweet. But I think too, for, individuals watching this, grad students, that maybe they should know that SPR really strives to give you that thorough feedback, as and that's something I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think you both agree with me. Not all journals will give you. So that is one excellent reason to start, your first publication, second, whatever it is, as a grad student, start with a place like SPR where you're getting that thorough, helpful feedback.
Yeah. Even when we do a desk reject, and a desk reject is when I, as the editor, say, this is not a good fit for the journal for whatever reason, so I'm not even going to send it out for peer review. A lot of times when you get a desk reject, and they're common, a lot of times when you get a desk reject from a journal, it'll just say like, no, thank you. We don't want to publish this. And you don't know why, you don't know what you did wrong. But, at SPR, we take the time to say, this doesn't fit within our guidelines. You talk about this and this, but here's where that, clashes with our published information. We'd love to see more of your work, or we'd love to see this paper in a different form. Here's what you need to do. So even if you don't send your paper out for peer review, we still make sure you know what's up and have a chance to redo your work. We really want grad students to publish, which I think is what makes us different from other journals who maybe don't have a vested interest in you publishing. All right, that was a good conversation. Thanks, y'all.